Hey guys, Wayne Walker here. Welcome to an episode of Better is Always Possible and Imagine the Possibilities. Now, this episode is going to focus on something that's very near and dear to my heart, and it's something that, you know, you may ask, well, why didn't you start this sooner, or why didn't you cover this subject matter sooner? Uh, and to be quite honest with you, just didn't think about it. But this focus of this video and some of the videos that are going to follow this is concerning the martial arts. And the martial arts is something I have a lot of experience in. I started training when I was 11, and all the way up I've owned schools and competed and all these other, I was on the All Army karate team. So I've got a lot of experience. And I've trained in a lot of different martial arts. I've got friends who own uh, training facilities in different styles, and so I was what I called myself a karate bum, meaning that I didn't care what style it was. I trained in it. If there was a fight night somewhere, I would drive to it because I wanted to fight or spar, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But what the focus of this video is, or this series, is about the martial arts and delving into the whys, the what fors, what the kinds of styles, and the various mental aspects. And I'm hoping that if you're watching this for the very first video, that if you're thinking about start training in the martial arts, or that you're currently training in the martial arts, or even if you're an instructor, uh, it may to use this information to broaden your thought process or reinforce what you're already thinking, uh, incorporate it, and really focus on some things. Uh, my goal here is not to get into the debate of which style is better than the other, uh, because the reality of it is this: I don't care what style you're in. A front kick is a front kick is a front kick. A side kick is a side kick is a side kick. A punch, a reverse punch is a reverse punch. A jab is a jab. There's commonalities in all styles. It's almost like it's almost like Mexican food. Okay, you can have a burrito or you can have a taco, but essentially, when you break it down, they're pretty much the same. Just maybe an extra ingredient here or there, but it's pretty much the same. One has a soft wrapping versus a hard, and vice versa. Uh, but it's Mexican food. Okay, uh, so I'm going to cover that. I'm going to cover this topic in that way. Now, what is martial arts? Martial arts is an organized system or tradition, typically going back hundreds, if not thousands, of years. Uh, Hold on here. I hit a button by accident. Don't want to lose where I'm at here. Uh, Also, let me make this disclaimer. Uh, I, I'm not going to edit this video heavily. I don't have time, and any mistakes that are in, and I go back and reword something, or I have a long pause or whatever, I may take out the pauses or that. But what you see is what you're going to get. Almost conversational. But also, click on the like button, the subscribe button for me, so I can grow this community. Because right now this is an exercise in a passion, the desire to share things, to grow, to explore the possibilities of doing better. Okay. So anyway, let's go back to what I was talking about. Martial arts again a tradition or of combat where people practice for various reasons, uh, from self-defense to self-image and so on and so forth. And a lot of times martial arts has a root in religion or spiritual development. Uh, a lot of martial arts have their roots in East Asia, uh, karate, judo, kung fu. You've got different styles. They emphasize discipline, respect, personal growth, personal development, uh, which making them not just about combat. Although the combat aspect is the prevalent focus of fighting. But what is really martial arts? What are you doing when you train in martial arts? Well, what I've always told my students, or the people that I was teaching, training, even in conversation with people would ask me, uh, what you're doing is you're training yourself to do unnatural things naturally. To do those things to overcome or to override our natural tendencies. Uh, for example, flinching. Flinching, being startled, something coming at you, you flinch, it's a defense mechanism. Now, if you're sparring, if you're fighting, flinching is probably not a good thing to have. Not something that you want to do. You know, if you're standing in front of someone and somebody throws a punch at you and you flinch, you go into that self well, you go into that natural reaction of protecting yourself. Then usually includes closing your eyes and drawing up and preparing. That's probably not a good thing to do when somebody's punching at you or kicking at you. So you have to learn, or you have to train yourself to overcome that process of flinching. Keep your eyes open to take it in. And that is what I'm talking about, doing unnatural things naturally, to incorporate them into you so they become a part of who you are. Now, some people, they train in martial arts and it's something that they do. Just like taking a coat and putting it on because it's cold outside. It's something that you do. That coat is not a part of you in the sense that it's not a part of the makeup of you. You put it on, you take it off as needed. You hang it up in the closet, you pull it out. Martial arts can sometimes be like that for people. It's something that they do. But then there's some people that it's a part of who they are. It defines them. It's a part of their makeup. It's a part of their process of everyday life. Because what they've learned in the martial arts, the skill set, the attitude, and so forth, they apply to everything, which is the camp that I fall in. Very easy. My wife and I live on a farm, and we have animals, uh, horses, cows, chickens, pigs, dogs, cats, goats. Um, hell, we've got animals on the property I don't even know about. But if I'm out working on a fence, or if I'm in a shop area or something, and something falls, and I have to uh, protect myself from the falling object or whatever, I don't huddle down and say, "Oh God, just let it get over." I typically am blocking or this because I'm seeing everything. I don't close my eyes. I look. I assess the situation very quickly, and that's what you're doing in martial arts. It carries over because if you in martial arts, if it's something that you have to think about as you're training in it, and I've seen instructors who have trained in martial arts for years, and it is still something that they do. It's not a part of who they are. which is very unfortunate. When I was a sales manager, and I would interview salespeople for my sales team. One of the questions that I ask people is, "What is your experience? What do you What is your experience?" And they would naturally come back and say, "Well, I've been in sales for 5, 6, 10 years, 20 years. That's my experience." Well, no, that's not your experience. That's how long that you say that you've been doing what you're doing. But experience is growth. So my questions would naturally move into, what seminars do you go to? What books have you read? What training, continued education, if you will? And many times they say, "Well, no, I've never read a sales book," or, "Yeah, I've got one. I read it. I don't even know where it's at." Or, "The seminar, yeah, my last company I was with put us in a seminar." So what it comes down to is, do you, if a person says they've got 10 years experience, do you have 10 years experience, or do you have 1 year's experience that you've just repeated 10 times and that you've remained static through that period? And for the most part, that's where a vast majority of people fall. Because when I was in sales, I always went to seminars. I went to continuing education. I read the books. I listened to the tapes way back when, and evolved into CDs and that. But the vast majority of those things I paid for. Those are things that I did, not the company. And if the company paid for it, great. But I'm still going to do it because it's a skill set to improve me, because I am the product. So in the martial arts, you're expanding your understanding, your training, and so on and so forth. And many times, unfortunately, that could mean that after a period of time in the school or the dojo that you're training at, that it may be time for you to leave there and go to a different school, different instructor, different style uh, to learn. Now, if you're focused on staying within one style, you get your belts and you get your black belt, and you're within that organization, and that then that's what you're doing. Now, you may or may not train outside of that to bring in different skill sets, and typically when that happens, you're going to bring different influences into your dojo that are not necessarily part of the same system, because the same systems typically have certain testing uh, parameters, what you need to use, and so on and so forth. When I started training, I first started training in Taekwondo. Uh, why Taekwondo? Well, I grew up in a small town. It was the only martial arts school around. Uh, my next door neighbor, who was a police officer, happened to be the instructor. He's the one that opened up the school. He was a police officer there. And that's how I got into Taekwondo. Now, there's a lot of instructors saying you've got to be true to the art, especially way back in the time that I started. There wasn't a lot of people that would cross pollinate with other styles, and you stayed true to your art. And we're going to discuss that as well. But I've always been one of those that I want to learn other aspects, other thought processes. Uh, and I really started doing that. Uh, I grew into that when one night at the school in the little town, and at any given time, our school had maybe 13 people in it. Uh, you know, and there were sometimes it got down to as low as six. So it wasn't really a money making uh, thing for the instructor, for my instructor. It was he was a police officer. He's training. He wanted to get, obviously, as a police officer, that was a skill set that he felt that he needed, which I completely agree with. Uh, but many times the school cost him money, so it was a labor of love and desire to teach, because he was a natural teacher, uh, and we trained in one style. And our school was only open Tuesdays and Thursday nights. That's it. And it opened at 6, and it would go until 9:30, 10, 10:30 at night. That's what our training class was. Now, after he started, he would separate out the white belts, but as soon as you became an orange belt, then you went into the general class, and the general class typically started at 7 o'clock after a period of time, and went to 9, between 9 and 10 o'clock in at night. So everybody trained together except for the white belts to get them up to speed. So that was it. Now, I had a key to the place after I hit green belt, because I wanted to train, and I would get friends, and we would go up there and train, and he would stop by every once in a while because he saw our car or that parked there, and see what we're doing. And but there was a time when another instructor came in, and it was a it was taekwondo, but it was a different style of taekwondo within the umbrella of taekwondo. Uh, it was Mudik Kwan. Uh, the style that I trained in was Chung Kwan. I believe it's, if I remember correctly. But anyway, they came in and they were more Americanized, whereas our style was very Korean based, because the head instructor, the master, was Korean. But these guys came in and they didn't have uniforms like everybody else. They had different colors and this and that. In my school, we had white uniforms. There was a uniform that you had to come in. You couldn't have different color pants and a top and a dobak or a gi top. Okay, so they came in and they started teaching on Mondays and Wednesday night. And one night I went up and I watched their class. It was completely different. And I said, "Oh, okay." So I went to my instructor and I said, "Can I come up and train on these 2 nights with these guys?" And he says, "Yeah, okay, okay." So I did that, and the way that they did things and the way that they sparred was completely different. And the attitude of me, of being a big fish in a very small pond, I became a very small fish in a larger pond, and it was great. I mean, I learned a lot. But anyway, so that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about as far as martial arts and training. And I'm going to cover a lot of this as we go on. So if I repeat myself, or if you feel like I'm kind of veering off or whatever, I apologize. But just be patient with me. Uh, so, what is the reason that people start learning the martial arts? What is it? Why does a person have the desire to learn? Well, that includes a variety of reasons. And it could be simply for self defense, the feeling of that you can protect yourself. It could be for physical fitness. It could be for confidence or self-esteem. And parents would often bring their kids up and say, "Hey, well, he's kind of reserved in this. He needs to be brought out of the shell." You know, there you go. It could be for discipline and focus. Again, parents would bring kids up, or maybe their wives would bring their husbands up and say, you know, he needs discipline and focus here, fixing. Okay, and martial arts includes that. I mean, you're going to get that. Hopefully, you're going to pick up on that naturally. It's going to become a part of you naturally. Uh, it could be for stress relief that you're in your business or this, and you just need some an outlet to relieve that stress. Okay, it could be for social interaction, like going to a gym. Although going to a gym, you don't have anybody on your ass to focus, telling you to focus. Uh, and then personal growth, to seeing what your limits are to expand your physical skills or your development, humility, respect, perseverance, a holistic approach, if you will. But what is truly the focus of martial arts? What is its purpose? What is its purpose for you? And I'm asking that as a rhetorical question. If you're the newest person that is thinking about starting martial arts training, or even if you're an advanced belt or even a black belt, what is your focus? And I can tell you that for me, if that focus had changed over a period of time, uh, and we'll get more into that a little bit later as well. Uh, then you look at it. So what are the differences in styles? Your different styles. Which one's the best? Uh, Short answer for that is the effectiveness of the style is the individual. It's like boxing. Now, boxing, it has different styles, uh, but really the focus of boxing is to punch. You're learning how to punch, learning how to take a punch. But with martial arts, there's a lot of different uh, styles, focuses. Uh, but let's look at martial arts in general. Okay, you have katas or forms within the style, which is a preset of of movements, blocks and kicks, and so on and so forth. And as you go up in belts, they get more complicated and they get more have a different focus, if you will. Typically, forms or katas are the simulation of combat with multiple opponents because you're changing directions. You're this and you're facing a different opponent. Uh, but katas and forms for me as an instructor, well, as a student, it was the means by which to get to the next belt. So as soon as you got your belt, you learned the form to get your first belt, and once you achieved that belt, then the focus automatically switched to okay, I need to learn the next form, because the next form was the basis or the foundation to move to the next belt. Looking back on that now, you know, not only now but years later, it was kind of silly as far as the focus. But that's the way that things were done at that time. So that's what you have. So now in martial arts, you have uh, breakdowns of different focuses depending on what your school was about. Maybe you joined a school that was geared towards competition. Well, that competition could include a lot of things. It could be point karate, which is back in the 60s and 70s, the early 70s, and going into the 80s and I guess the 90s. I haven't heard of a point karate tournament in a number of years. Uh, they kind of faded away. Uh, but really, point karate, looking back on it, and even world champions, uh, I looked at it as I looked at it as a game of tag. because it's within that realm of style of fighting, if you will. Now, from there, you go into full contact. Full contact is less rules, but you still had rules. You couldn't gouge the eyes or hook them in the mouth or elbow them in the back of the head. There were rules to it, full contact. Uh, it involved punching and kicking, of course. Then you had kickboxing, where that came out, and because organizations or business wanted to expand it to the general public, and they didn't think that full contact would be something that people would watch. But what they did is they took kickboxing and they took the rules of boxing, essentially, and applied them to the martial arts. And the rules were simple: you kick above the waist, so anything below the waist you couldn't attack. Uh, you could kick from the waist all the way up to the head. You couldn't use elbows. You couldn't poke the eyes. You couldn't this. You had to use closed fist or open fist, but with the gloves, uh, that was really hard to do because you had boxing gloves on, and there were just certain uh, uh, techniques involving the hands that you just simply couldn't do because of the restriction of the glove. Uh, and then you got dojo sparring, where you're in the class and you're sparring with your fellow students. Uh, and you line up and you get in front of each other, and then you may have, 5 or 6 or 10 people, and you got them facing each other, and the instructor would go, okay, bow each other, fighting stance, knock yourself out. And you move around and blah, 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 blah. You have time, and then you rotated and you go to the next person. It's like a round robin, but you had a different person each time. So you had to modulate your intensity level based on the person that was in front of you, whether it be a male or a female, and the belt at which they're at. If you were a higher belt, you had to bring yourself down to their level or that. So it taught you to like I say, modulate yourself, uh, and control yourself. And then you had sparring for competition. If you're training for competition, which it could be the point karate, full contact, or kickboxing, and you're preparing yourself for that. It's typically a little bit more intense, a little bit more contact, uh, if that's what you want to call it. Uh, and then from there, you moved into self defense. And self defense is a broad term covering, and you're painting that with a very broad brush. And self defense, it could be street fighting, training for as a street fighting, one on one, multiple people. Uh, but that's what it covered. And there even was, that schools would do a self defense course or self defense class where it started on this date and it went for 6 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever it was, and then it had an end. How effective that is for a person, I guess, depends on the individual. Uh, but we'll get it again, and we'll delve into that a little bit more in 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 a different video. Uh, so now fighting. What is fighting, and what is the difference in fighting? Because there's different ways of fighting. One is striking, whether it be kick or punch, grappling, or wrestling could fall into that category. Uh, Clinching, to where you're in close and you're battling on the inside, if you will. MMA, which is an interesting thing when MMA came back and came out in the 90s. Uh, I guess it was the 90s. It for a period of time it kind of set the martial arts community, if you will, back on its heels because the original MMA or the Ultimate Fighting had people from different styles that would come together. There were no weight classes, and you get in there and basically you fight. And as I said earlier, a front kick is a front kick is a front kick. A jab is a jab is a jab. And the interesting thing about the mixed martial arts and really fighting in general, if you're moving outside of the dojo uh, or your training center, uh, if you take two people and you put them together to fight, and one person is judo and the other person is taekwondo, they may start out in their respective style, but depending on who the dominant person was, it always degraded into punching and grabbing. And when that happens, I defy anybody to show me where the style is. Tell me which one is which. Okay. Now the judo guy may get on the inside and remember a particular throw and throw the person down, but then you get down there and it's ground and pound, so to speak, is what they say. And when that happens, what that shows me or is that martial arts is something that they do. It's not who they are. Because if it's who you are, your style or the way that you've trained is the way that you present yourself in front of someone. And there's a huge, huge, huge benefit of doing that. Now, the other one is style of fighting difference. Again, going back, point karate, full contact, kickboxing, uh, street fighting. Street fighting. What is street fight? You're fighting in the street. No rules typically. Although in the olden days, I guess, to a great degree, it's like schoolyard. If you're going to fight a kid and say, "Hey, meet me behind this building. We're gonna fight," and you show up in the back of the building and you've got a group of your friends from both sides there, and then you set the rules. Well, you can't, no biting, no pulling hair, no this, no that, and then let's go. Okay. Uh, and typically, after the fight concluded, the two people who were fighting may become very good friends. Mutual respect, regardless of who won. If you can, if you can say, okay, who won the fight, because really, when you are in a conflict or in combat, when it really break it down, no one wins the fight. Uh, and then again, going back to what is fighting and what's the difference, the self-defense training program, beginning and an end, maybe teaching some strategies. But really, what self-defense means, I mean, when you break it down, when somebody's teaching self-defense course, you're basically taking a cake or the batter, cake batter, that you make the cake out of, which is the martial arts. It's your style, let's say. And instead of making a cake, you're taking that same batter and you're making a cupcake. And that cupcake is smaller, it's gone in 2 bites, whereas a cake is going to take you a little while to eat it. They're both the same, but self-defense courses, the ones that I've seen, the one I've watched, uh, is basically a watered down martial arts class. And then at the conclusion of that class, the if you developed any sort of skill set at all, starts to diminish as time goes on. And then it could be a week or 2 weeks or a month or whatever, and then all of a sudden everything that you learned or were exposed to just flies out of the brain. My wife took a self-defense course some years ago that the local PD was putting on, and I went up and watched. And they had the suit so they could learn how to punch, and so they didn't have to hold back and so on and so forth. Uh, but she remembers very little of that. So it wasn't a part of her, and it's not a part of most people that take those self-defense courses. It makes you feel good, may give you a false sense of security, but really it's almost like cotton candy. You know, it's big and fluffy and looks good and it tastes sweet, but once you get it in your mouth, it just dissipates and it's gone. Uh, so, all right. So, in within the fighting, what you have is stand-up fighters. Everything is done standing up. You have submission fighters, fighters, ground and pound. But typically, a street fight, and again, something else we'll get into a little bit later, uh, the fight will graduate. Stand up fighters, if it's not over very quickly, will typically move to the ground very quickly uh, within the first couple of minutes, if you will. And then once there, you have, you know, submission or the pounders. And there are no rules. Uh, and there's different levels of that. Uh, like I said, the schoolyard bullying, and you're fighting behind the schoolhouse. You know, you have a beginning and an end, and you got to brush yourself up and you go to class or you go home. Street fight is a little bit different. It can be that, but it also could escalate very quickly into something much more dangerous. So, so what is a fight and how do you train for it? What's your plan? What is your plan when you start the martial arts? What's your plan? Because if you're training in for a competitive aspect of the martial arts, what's your plan for training? Well, your plan for training is to spar a lot with different people, to go to different lengths. You have to run, you have to condition yourself, and all of these things to prepare yourself for those rounds, if you will. But you also have to prepare for what happens when you go outside of the dojo. And that's completely different training. It's a completely different focus of training. Now, are there some overlaps between? Absolutely. But the mindset is different. And this is where we get into the mind, which is what I do as a hypnotist, as a mind coach, if you will. You have to be prepared in your mind. And even if you're sparring in your dojo or in competitive, you have to be in the right mindset. Uh, and I'm trying to remember, I think it was Mike Tyson, or I heard that he had said this, that, you know, everybody has a plan before the fight until they get hit. And then that plan goes out the window, depending on how you condition yourself. Because there's some people that say, well, I'm taking martial arts and I know how to fight, and all they've done is dojo sparring, and then they get themselves in a position where they get popped in the nose or hit in the eye or thrown to the ground, and it becomes an oh shit moment of what's going on. This is not what is supposed to happen. And then they have an epiphany, I guess you could say, or a come to Jesus moment. So what's your plan? What is your purpose for training in the martial arts? Besides all the other stuff, the self-image and getting more self-confident and all of that, and I also like long walks on the beach type of thing. What is your plan? What is your instructor teaching you, or instructors? How are you teaching your students to prepare themselves for walking out the doors of your dojo? Because as an instructor, you have a responsibility to prepare that person, to make sure that they understand the skill set for which they're developing. See, the false sense of skill is the color of belt that you're wearing. That may show your escalation into a system, and you've learned certain things, and you've done your forms, your katas, your one steps, your self-defense movements is grabbing this, and I'm going to do this, and all of that, and that's all well and good. But as an instructor, you have a responsibility to put those things in perspective, because the self-defense techniques that are taught are not applicable in a real life situation. And the reason they're not applicable is because your opponent or your attacker in the dojo is complicit, meaning that they're just going with what you're giving them. If you do this, their reaction is this. Now, let's go back to that term flinching, because flinching is alive and well naturally, okay? And even if you're trained, there's a certain subconscious level of flinching that protects you. For example, if a person attacks you and you take their arm and you're trapping it, in a nanosecond, they no longer become complicit. They no longer become complicit as soon as they feel a threat or pain. And then the subconscious mind takes over, and that trapping, you start getting resistance to. And you're trying to do this and get them here. They're fighting this and this, and now you've evolved or devolved into a glorified pissing match or wrestling match. And you can't understand why that technique didn't work. Why didn't it work? What are you doing? What are you doing as a student to realize that and to understand that and to take steps to break it down? Or if you're the instructor and you've not thought about that, or if you're not teaching in such a way that explains that, then what's the plan? How do you change your training to compensate for that weakness, if you will, that missing piece? See, I'm a firm believer in traditional training. It's like forms or katas. What's the purpose of a form and kata? Well, again, it's a preset number of movements, fighting synthetically multiple opponents. That's what it is. But when I look at forms or katas, if I'm doing them or if I'm judging them, what I look for is perfection. Is that each movement is the the goal is to have it perfect. The perfect stance, the perfect strike, the perfect timing in order to create muscle memory. Because in an actual conflict, and we'll get more, let me circle back, in an actual conflict, you can basically take anything that you've learned here, and as soon as you're in a conflict that is outside your school or dojo, or maybe even inside, that automatically everything gets cut in half. You you lose 50% of your technique, of your focus, of your balance, of your fight plan, because it devolves into survival, the perception of survival. If it's in the dojo, maybe you have a person who's come in for the night. He's a guest from another school, or that, and they've come for the fight night or come to train for the night. They're bringing in a different energy. They're bringing in different. They're bringing in something that is not that's not familiar. And now you've thrown your game gets thrown off, especially in the lower belts, but even in the higher belts, because you're changing what your intent is, and that intent is that you don't want to look bad, so you up the level of intensity. And then when you do that, because you're upping the level of intensity, that may not be where you've trained at, and then all of a sudden it devolves. Whatever the case may be, what's your plan? What's your focus? How are you going to train? So, back to the walking outside the dojo. When you're training, each move that you do, each punch, each kick, that one technique stands alone. Okay? And it stands alone as a piece of a puzzle. And that puzzle, that piece, fits any other piece that you have. Combinations. Okay? And the only way for you to be effective when you walk outside the dojo is to understand that very clearly and to train for it. To train not only physically, muscle memory, but to train this up here. To slow things down. To look situational environment. To look at the target, look at the individual. Because regardless of what this individual is presenting to you, you should remain true to your training. Because if you don't, you're just another guy this guy's in a fight with. And now it becomes, not the size of the dog, but the size of the fight in the dog. And you could have been training for 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, 20 years. I mean, go on YouTube and see all the masters who get their ass handed to them because they're in a bubble, and they want to promote all this goofy crap. I mean, think about it. But each movement, and there are instructors, there's people on the internet who will break things down and say, well, we tried this and it didn't work and that. Well, yeah, if you're taking the very basics of what a person is learning, which is training, the training aspect, and you're trying to apply it to a real world situation, none of it's going to work. Zilch, none of it is going to work. And if it does, it's probably happened by accident. not with the intent. So each one of those pieces of the puzzle can transition into each other based on what you're getting from the other individual. But if you're standing there waiting for that individual to do this one thing so you can do your self-defense movement, you're in a world of hurt. And you're going to be sorely disappointed when this whole thing is over. Probably feeling a lot of pain as well. So you need to look at what you're doing. Instructors, you need to look at how you're teaching. And I know instructors, you know, it's everybody's, all instructors are up on that pedestal. I understand that. But you need to really think about what you're teaching your students so that you prepare them out on the street. And what that means is you must be prepared as well. Regardless of what your belt is, regardless of how many degrees that you have in the black belt, it really doesn't mean anything. I mean, if you don't think that I'm right, then take your belt off, throw it on the floor, and sit and watch that belt and see how many people it jumps up and fights. Belts don't mean anything except within the system that you are to, you know, just like the military, you have different ranks. And there are generals who are complete idiots because they've never been exposed to ground fighting or war or real war. Okay, and again, I'm not presenting anything here to upset anybody or that. I'm trying to bring a level of of reality, realism, and for you to think about something. Okay, so fighting, and it's getting kind of long here, so I'm going to wrap this up here in just a minute. Well, you know what? Let me wrap it up now because I get off into this other area and I'm gonna end up going a little bit further. Okay, so let me just wrap this up right here. I hope that whatever I presented here for you to think about and to look at does just that. I hope you didn't find it boring, but that you take this information and you use it to make yourself better, because better is always possible. It's like my granddad used to say, there's 100 ways to skin a cat. They're all right because a cat gets skinned. There are just some ways are better than others. They're a lot neater, they're less messy. There are just some ways that are better than others. And if you're a cat lover, I'm sorry for using that analogy. That's what the term that I grew up with. Okay? So anyway, hit the like button on this. I hope you come back for the next video. I'm going to be covering some things because this is really has evolved into something much more than what I intended it to. And it's like peeling paint on a wall. Once the paint starts peeling and you start peeling off that section, the next thing you know, half the wall is, you've peeled the paint off because it continues to go. That's kind of what this video series is going to go into. So anyway, give me your feedback in the section below. Hit that like button. I've got other topics. My wife and I will be hosting other subject matters outside of this, but this is something that I wanted to bring to you. And I'm going to have a guest on the subject with certain discussions. So, all right, guys, be good, do great things, and like I always tell people, make good decisions. God bless. Bye.